With today's speech, Liz will prove that the choices that you make about the thoughts that you think are no exception. She will encourage you to begin thinking about what you've been thinking about. Because as the title of Liz's speech indicates, your thoughts matter. Please help me welcome Liz Digirolamo.
Stephanie Nielsen is living proof that your life can change in an instant. She is living proof that you got the power to overcome, to change your thoughts, take control of your thoughts, change them, and in doing so, take control of your life. Change your life. Stephanie Nielsen's story proves you've got the power to choose the life you live by choosing the thoughts you think. This is Stephanie's story. It was an absolutely beautiful day when Stephanie and her husband, Christian, a licensed pilot, along with their friend and flight instructor, Doug Kennard, set out on a pleasure ride from Arizona to New Mexico in a small Cessna airplane. Stephanie described the flight as romantic, recalling looking down through the plane's window down below into the Arizona desert and seeing the beautiful rock formations and trees below. After a scheduled fuel stop in Arizona's St. John's Airport, upon taking off again, just after taking off, the plane stalled and tragedy struck. Careening out of control, the plane fell from the sky, smashed through power lines before hitting the pavement and erupting into flames. The newly loaded 36 gallons of highly flammable aviation fuel fed the 800-degree inferno that ensued. Attempting to escape, Stephanie's husband, Christian, recalls that the handle on the plane's door was too hot to touch, and so he could pound on it, and did so hard enough that he could barely get it open, just enough for him to squeeze through the door, get through, jump out of the plane, and then run to safety. He recalls hearing Stephanie's voice behind him saying, "Get out, get out," and thinking that she was behind him, but after rolling on the floor to douse, on the ground to douse the flames, he looked behind him, realized Stephanie was still in the plane. Seriously injured with a broken back and third-degree burns over 30% of his body, Christian struggled to get back to the plane and to his wife. But his efforts were thwarted by an impenetrable wall of flames, violent flames and intense heat. Stephanie had been knocked unconscious by the impact of the crash. When she awoke, she was still buckled in to the back seat of the small Cessna airplane, which by now was fully engulfed in flames. She remembers that she had to struggle to unbuckle her seatbelt, and then she had to crawl over the front seats of the small cockpit to reach the door to crawl out. As hard as she was fighting to save her life, it seemed that the blazing metal carcass seemed to be fighting with the same intensity to become the fiery car. But death lost the battle that day, and all three miraculously survived. Amen. As bad as Christian's injuries were, Stephanie was far worse. She had deep burns over 60 to 80% of her body. One of Stephanie's sisters said when she first saw her, what she saw wasn't human. Another sister described her as looking like something from a horror movie. Doug Kennard, their friend and flight instructor, suffered the most serious injuries from the crash, with burns over 90% of his body And just 24 hours later, the husband and father of 4 lost his battle with death and died. Christian and Stephanie were put into medically induced comas to help them manage the pain. And after 5 weeks, Christian was awake and starting to heal. But Stephanie spent 6 months in the hospital, 3 of them in a coma, wrapped in what one reporter described as a cocoon of gauze and tubes, undergoing countless surgeries and skin grafts. The burns on Stephanie's face were so deep and so bad that the doctors said that they had to actually cut away all of the skin and all of the tendons and essentially rebuild her face. But it wasn't until Stephanie awoke from her coma that her real struggles began. She was so severely disfigured by the crash and by the fire that even her own children couldn't recognize her. Her youngest of 4 children, little Nicholas, who was 18 months old at the time of the crash, had been living with his Aunt Lucy. When Stephanie returned home after 6 months, her son, now 2 years old, didn't even know who she was. Stephanie not only had to restore her relationships, heal physically, she had to heal emotionally. She had emotional wounds she didn't understand and struggled to understand. How it seemed that her husband had left her behind, had abandoned her, didn't come back to help her. She was stuck in that blazing inferno. Their very different stories seemed impossible to reconcile. Christian remembers hearing Stephanie's voice behind her in the cockpit before he ever jumped out, saying, "Get out, get out!" And then he thought that she was behind him. Stephanie remembers Christian already out of the plane when she awoke. The couple recounted the events of that day over and over again, night after night, every night for over a year. Stephanie kept asking, "Where were you? How could you leave me? Why did you abandon me?" Christian struggled, feeling that he had failed. He struggled to come to terms with that day himself. Even as her children, one by one, recovered, came back to her, she continued to have difficulty rebuilding her life. Then one day, her father, with whom she was very close, pleaded with her to get better. These were his words. He said, "You've got this family. You've got these beautiful children. You've always wanted to be a mother. You can't just give up on them," he said. "Just do it. Just choose to do it." He said, "You can choose." Stephanie took her father's advice and made that choice. She chose not to give up, start over again, to live again. She chose to use the power of choice that God gave her to control her thoughts in order to do it. In sharing her story, in her own words, Stephanie says, "To tell my story would be wrong if He, God, wasn't a part of it. Because He is this story," she says. "He's the one that made it triumphant and glorious." When asked how she changed from a negative mindset to a positive one, she says simply, "It didn't happen really fast." She explained how she began looking at what she had, what she still had that was wonderful. 4 beautiful children, her handsome husband, her faith, her relationships. This is what she said. "I just remember thinking about those things, and pretty soon they outnumbered all of the awful things that I was going through. And so it would just spin around," she said, "and I could do that all day long. And I wanted to do that all day long because I was pretty bummed a lot." Can you imagine? It was her decision to begin thinking to begin thinking about what she was thinking about, to constantly realign her thoughts with God's truth instead of the enemy's lies, to just spin it around, as she said, as she put it, and begin replacing every negative thought with a positive one. Stephanie Nielsen is living proof that you've got the power to overcome, to take control of your thoughts, and by doing so, to take control of your life. Stephanie Nielsen, by beginning to think right, saved her life. Beginning to think right can save yours too. Stephanie can do it. You can do it. So, what